First, I want to say thank you for the invitation to talk a little bit more about racial equity and allyship within the LGBTQ plus community. So I'm going to use that lens as well. You can tweet about this experience. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn, all of those awesome platforms, except for Snapchat. I haven't quite gotten into that world. But please, if anything lands for you today, I would like to hear about that. You can add the comments there. You can shoot me some questions. There's some folks that'll be sending the questions directly to me. I really like for my time when I'm talking about such topics like this to be really interactive. So I would appreciate that. I also, when I'm face to face, like will totally wait. Right? If people have a response or question, I'll take a sip of water so we give people a chance to be connected. I know we talk a little bit about equality, but really my focus is on equity. And you'll see me dive a little bit more into equity versus equality. At the end, I'm about action steps and what does it look like to move forward and implement those things. And talking about allyship is also critically important. There's a lot of conversation in this space about moving from allyship to advocate. So I'll go a little bit more into that. A little bit about me, as you heard Aaron mention, all of those titles and wonderful things, but I also wanted to include a pic or two of my cute dog. Her name is Jordan. Her middle name is Danielle. And I love all things Christmas. And so during the pandemic last year, as all of us were experiencing it in different ways, I decorated for Christmas, had to be about August or September. And she sat pretty enough, long enough for me to get a picture in. So some of the work that I'm able to do, really the conversation about equity is woven into all those different components. Even working at Dallas Area Habitat, housing affordability has an equity component to that as well. Managing community engagement at the Dallas Police Department also had an equity component. In my unit, we had the LGBT liaison. We did outreach to our Asian American community and African American community as well. And we really focused on how can we continue to build bridges with the community in which we serve. As you heard was mentioned, I also have done several trainings and a facilitator about conversations such as implicit bias. So some of those key components I'll be dropping in here today in this virtual conversation. And then the work I'm able to do as the co-chair of Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation really talks about a process of building equity into many of the systems that have historically not worked for people on the margins, people of color, women, our LGBTQ plus community as well. But the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation organization really focuses on that racial component because much of our history as this nation and across the world really has to do with that racialized component. So let's get into it. I mean, I would not be an out proud Black lesbian and proud about all of that if I did not say happy Pride to my people, Ralasa, my folks. This particular version of the Pride flag incorporates our transgender brothers and sisters. The Black and the brown stripe that you see as well really has a greater emphasis on inclusion and progression. So I love this particular image of the Pride flag. So happy Pride to all my LGBTQ plus family. Thank you to the many supporters, advocates, allies, those organizations and individuals that are doing the great work of supporting and lifting up the LGBTQ plus community. And bonus, you don't just have to wait till June, Pride Month, really to support our LGBTQ plus family. The hope and the desire, and you'll see that as I continue talking, is that all throughout the year, you're really continuing to support, be an ally, be an advocate for those in the LGBTQ plus community. Equality does not equal equity. I love these two images. Some of you may have seen it, and some of you may not have seen these images down there at the bottom. You know, you can add in the chat, what do these images mean to you? What's the difference, right? You remember you doing those activities as a child. What's the difference between these two pictures? One of the differences that should really stand out for you is under equity, you'll see that there's two different heights of ladders, right? If we're all trying to pick apples, you see over there on the equality slide, on the equality picture, that we've given those two individuals the same size ladder. That's equality, summed up in a nutshell. regardless of their starting line, regardless of if the finish line or the goal post is moved further out for one person, regardless if the tree is bent and leaning, the privilege, the opportunity, the access is leaning more towards one person than the other, it doesn't matter. We're going to give everyone the same slice of pie. We're going to give everyone the same height when it comes to the ladder. And then sadly enough, what happens in most of these spaces is that we then fault the individual that we did not even provide a ladder that would be beneficial to them. We fault them for not achieving at the same rate as the other person who is closer to the apples. So why a focus on racial equity? As was mentioned in the video prior to me joining, there are other veins, there's other avenues of equity that we think about. We think about ability, we think about sexual orientation, gender, we think about equity in a variety of ways. But as this definition points to, there's a reason and a clear definition of equality versus equity, but there's a reason we have to focus on racial equity. And I have my notes, so you might see me look down every so often, but I don't want to misstate anything that I'm sharing with you all today. And again, I love your feedback. I love your questions if you have any of them. Equality doesn't take into account the very real and special needs of individuals. Equality doesn't lend itself to thinking about individuals and their unique circumstances. And equality definitely doesn't look at the very real damaging impact of systems, processes, and policies that have done deeply rooted harm to people of color. This image, a lot of us have seen this image here where you have three different people trying to watch baseball over this fence. Equality shows everybody was provided a box, the same size box, regardless of their height. Similar to the image I just showed about those at the tree and needing a different ladder. Equity says, you know what, somebody may not need the same number of boxes to watch the same game. So we need to think about equity. I've highlighted on this slide the term outcome. Equity really is concerned about impact and outcomes, not intent, but impact and outcomes. There's another, as people are moving into this space, there's another part of this image that talks about justice. And justice is simply the removal of the fence altogether. Is the fence an unnecessary barrier to people enjoying the game? So this can be a continuum. Many of us start in the equality, we're thinking about, okay, are we providing the same level of XYZ? Then once we're there and we're learning, okay, equity is a whole different thing. Are we looking at impact and intent? And that's its own thing. And we need to be focused on what should we provide? What do we need to provide for others and to others so that their outcomes can be similar to, exceed, whatever the case, but that their outcomes, the intent, the impact and outcomes is not something that is not tailor-made to what that person, group of people, whatever that is, what they may need. So I've just had breakfast, so I'm not really hungry, but I absolutely love sweets. During the pandemic, so many of us took up baking. I did not. I took up napping, but many of us took up baking. And this quote in particular is one that I really like when it comes to talking about equity. So in the chat, I want you to share, and perhaps they can share a couple of comments that you're going to talk about. What does equity mean in this quote for you? How does this land for you? Equity must be baked in, not sprinkled on. It's one of my favorite quotes. I don't even know who to attribute it to, but I heard it several years ago when I was doing the work of truth, racial healing, and transformation. We've really been focused on that work here in the city of Dallas for about 3 or 4 years now with that particular organization. So how does that quote land for you, either individually or as an organization? As you're looking at your processes, your policies, your procedures, the outcome, the data, equity must be baked in, not sprinkled on. Does it land for you? For some people, it lands. I've done, a similar conversation about equity specifically racial equity. And oftentimes this is the quote. And if you're a tweeting person, I am a live tweeter when I attend conferences and such. This is one of those awesome things I would be tweeting about because it's such a jewel. When you're thinking about any of your organization's policies, processes, outcomes, or data, and you're looking at the concept of equity, it means it must be baked in and not sprinkled on. If any of you are bakers out there, maybe you took up baking, maybe you know a smidge about baking. It's not enough if a recipe calls for 2 cups of sugar, you've already mixed it, it's already in the oven, you forgot those 2 cups of sugar. It will not come out the same if you decide to pour those 2 cups of sugar on top of your muffins, on top of your cupcakes. For any of the ingredients, for things to turn out as they should, the ingredients have to be added in as you're going along and cannot be sprinkled on top. I think one of the areas that I see most individuals and organizations kind of stray is equity, specifically in this topic, racial equity, is not thought of until after the fact, right? It's not thought of until now we see the outcomes or we see the data and we're like, ooh, it looks like we're not doing something right here. It looks like we're not hitting the mark. And so we need to probably go back down the line and see if we can tweak some things here and there to reach the equity. Thank you for what was shared. I see Monica, equity must be as thoughtfully included in the front end design and use of the product, processes, et cetera, as any other feature. Absolutely. It's a perfect way to describe it. It must be thoughtfully, I love that word that you mentioned and you included, must be as thoughtfully included in the front end design and use of the product, process, et cetera, as any other feature. Absolutely. When talking about implicit bias, we talked about how many of the algorithms out there, it has a bias baked into it already. And so how difficult is it? And one of the things, one of the actions I would have those in the classroom take is like if you Googled professional hair, this was something that came out several years ago. If you Google professional hair, most of the images that you'll see will be of a certain person, of a certain type of hair that didn't necessarily take into account those with probably natural hair. I have locks, and it didn't necessarily take into account Black women, Latina women that have a different hair texture. Usually it would be straight hair and it would be white women. Gary, thank you. To me, this means that orgs must have equity inclusion at the front end of the decisions they make, the culture, there we go, I love it, the culture they foster and intentionality behind all things. That's it. That's being baked in. Victoria, thank you. Equity shouldn't be something that is just thoughtlessly peppered into an organization. It should be an integral aspect of every fiber of the organization. I love all of those comments. I think organizations sometimes can fool themselves and fool others into thinking that sometimes performative statements do the trick. But I promise you, those inside of your organization that are experiencing your organization on that ground level every day understand that it's not necessarily the same. Thank you. As a former professional baker, I suggest that equity should be even more than one of the ingredients that is mixed in. It should be the natural starter. Yes, yes, yes. That's awesome. I love that. I'm a data person, right? So the conversation oftentimes about equity can be like this feel good, it's just for the betterment of humanity. I love the quote, "In God we trust, all others bring data." So an organization, an individual can't tell me they're doing the work of equity and then they have no data to support it, period. Prior to leaving the corporate world, I was in system support at Verizon Yellow Pages for so many years, and it was about data even then. So what is the data telling you in your work, in your personal life? Are you capturing the appropriate data to help you understand your impact and outcomes? The part I didn't add here is oftentimes many of us leave out the demographic data that is just as critical for us to take a look at and review. So again, I said, I don't trust the work. I don't trust the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, allyship, whatever it is that you're talking about. I do not trust that work if it is not backed and rooted in the data that you're showing me. I mentioned before, equity is focused on impact and outcomes. So what is the data telling you about your impact and your outcomes? What is the data telling you about your policies, practices, and actions? I've conducted a similar conversation earlier this week, and someone brought up the example of their training program within their organization. What does the data tell you about who is applying, who's not applying, who's being selected, who's allowed to go through, who's flourishing, who's promoting, who's not promoting, the tenure of your employees? What does the data tell you? In understanding your impact and outcomes, it is just as important to focus on intentional and unintentional consequences. I know I've been in a variety of spaces and I heard people say they're not racist or they don't intend, right? Let's use that word. They don't intend to be racist or prejudiced or biased or discriminatory. And that's all well and good. I hear you when you say that. But those concepts are damaging whether you intend to be or you do not intend to be, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And the data should be able to parse that out for you. So one of the conversations I also get to have is about moving from ally, let me go back, moving from ally to advocate. We talk a lot about the concept of allyship. Towards the bottom, you'll see those two thoughts that I've highlighted in yellow. Those are more across the advocacy lane. Allyship is important, absolutely critical. Civil rights movement, we needed allies, we needed advocates. The LGBTQ plus movement, we needed allies and we needed advocates at all levels, including elected officials, organizations. As we continue the fight for equality and specifically equity within our country, within our organizations and our neighborhoods, within our states and our cities, we all need allies and we need advocates. It's critical. It's necessary to get anything done. So sometimes we don't fully understand what that means about being an ally, being an advocate. I've told many people an ally is great. I love it. But what's being said and done when the other is not in the room? Specifically, I ask very pointed questions to my friends when you have an uncle at Thanksgiving, a grandma at Thanksgiving, or doing a family holiday that says an off-color comment or remark, either about the LGBTQ plus family or Black people or whatever the other is for you and your family or those close to you. What is being said and done? How do you be an ally and or an advocate for those individuals that are not in the room? You're part of an organization, and many of you have the privilege and the honor to attend conferences like this. Many of you are in positions of power within your organization. You're setting forth policies and procedures. You're laying out the way things will go moving forward. So how are you ensuring you're incorporating the voice, the needs, the concerns of the other in those rooms that they may not be in? I've asked people a couple of things. If they're not in the room, perhaps you should think about inviting those folks into the room. That can be done through data, surveys, forums, whatever that looks like. I've also asked that if that person is not in the room, you're not capable of bringing them in the room, then be sure that you put on that thinking cap. I call it the equity lens and goggles, the equity hat, to say, how might this experience, how might this policy, how might this anything impact those that are not in the room? So how are you truly creating those policies and processes that are inclusive? So for Dallas Area Habitat, if we're thinking about homeowners, are we looking at the data to see the types of homeowners, their income level, education level that are going through our program? Our financial, you have to go through a financial literacy education program before you even get to be mortgage ready and qualified. How are we using the data to inform our processes? Are we doing a homeowner survey, that's which we're looking at now, to all of our current Dallas Area Habitat homeowners to figure out what's working, what's not working? It's not enough just to put a family in the house. It's about also keeping them in the house. What are those intended, those intentional and unintentional consequences, outcomes, and impacts of our actions? I've said this before about allyship during Pride Month, kind of tongue in cheek, because I can be really sarcastic and jokey. As a Black lesbian, I don't need an organization or individual to be at gay pride parades with me. I'm in Dallas, Texas. We have an amazing gay pride parade. We have an awesome neighborhood here in Dallas. It's not, I'm thankful, but it's not necessary that I see my allies during the gay pride parade. What's most helpful for me is when you are being an ally and an advocate for me as a Black lesbian woman. Again, like I said, in some of those more difficult conversations. As a Black woman, it's not enough that on MLK Day or Juneteenth is coming up that I'm seeing all of the organizations and individuals talk and tweet about Juneteenth. That's cute, but it doesn't necessarily help change the systems in which makes those types of things even more difficult to continue to talk about and celebrate as we move forward. So as you all are thinking about allyship or advocacy, and most people are along the continuum of even equity, and so you may be along the continuum of allyship and advocacy, and maybe you're more comfortable, maybe you're just dipping your toes into this conversation for equity, allyship, or advocacy. And so just speaking up when people may need you most. How are you addressing your own biases, implicit and explicit biases? How are you doing that? There's a pastor here in Dallas that calls it the hard work and the heart work of addressing your own biases as well. And again, I mentioned those special days, Pride Month, Black History Month, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, whatever the day is, right? Lesbian Visibility Day, whatever that day is, how are you showing up for those communities, the other, outside of those days? I was a military brat, and so I come with my own implicit bias about folks in the military. Have a great pride and affinity and love for that. So I ask and implore each of you to stand up for the other in the room, be an ally and an advocate for the other in those spaces. So what can we do? What can you, we, us, what can we continue to do? And don't forget, you can ask questions. They're going to be giving me the questions as you ask any of them. What can we do to move forward? I'm about action, right? So like we've had this wonderful conversation. We talked about equality versus equity. We talked about show me the data, got to see the data. What is it? We talked about allyship to advocacy. Now it's like, what can we do? How can we focus on outcomes and intent? What is the data telling you? One of the conversations I have with individuals is also, are we using data in the opposite way, in which it's just confirming our biases anyway? And I use voter participation, right? When we see the numbers for those who vote, those who don't vote, do we look at that data and say, you know what? Those kids over there of that particular race, they just don't vote. They're just not engaged. They don't care about politics. They don't care about the civic engagement process. Are we using the data in that way to confirm our own biases? Are we interrogating it a bit more to tell us, what is it about the message of voting? What is it about the process? What is it about the inclusion in the voting process and the civic engagement process that is neglecting to capture this group of individuals? That is neglecting to be inclusive of folks that may need to get their voting information, text, tweet, however they choose to be communicated with and communicate each and every day. So when I do talk about outcomes and impact, and are we looking at the data, not just simply to confirm our own biases, but how are we interrogating what the data is telling us? Read some more. My work at Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. We have our own website. If you're interested in taking a look, there's a resources page, there's videos, there's information, there's literature, there's suggested reading list. Oftentimes when we lean into this space about racial equity, and if we lean into the space of LGBTQ plus rights and stories and lives, we seek out a Black person. We seek out a Latino. We seek out a gay man. We seek out a transgender woman or a Black transgender woman to tell us their story. Be mindful that that storytelling can be continuously traumatic if nothing ever happens with the story that they've given you. So I tell people, do your own research. There's plenty of books you can read. You can find perspectives and stories that are different from yours. Cultivate brave spaces for these conversations. Believe me, if you have a diverse work group, these conversations are happening whether you are included in them or not. The conversations are happening to me as I'm partnering with organizations to see if I have to bring up, it's Pride Month, what are we going to do as an organization for Pride Month? Or there's an incident that's happened in our country, and what are we going to do? How are we taking a stand? What do we need to, who do we need to talk to as far as our stakeholders to show support? So cultivate those brave spaces for those conversations. Build coalitions and partnerships. The video earlier also mentioned supporting those organizations that are already doing the work. I have friends here in Dallas that talk about, starting nonprofits or the work that they plan to do. And I'm like, you know what? There's a nonprofit out there that's probably doing the work that you think you want to do. There's so many organizations out that are doing the work. And sometimes being an ally and advocate is about supporting the work of those individuals. So I'm going to leave you. I started with a slide of my cute puppy. She's no longer a puppy. She's 9. Her name is Jordan Danielle, as I mentioned. Please stay connected with me. I have time for questions. If anyone has any questions out there, I have time to answer any questions for you. Stay connected. My LinkedIn name is Joli Angel Robinson. I absolutely love my middle name. My parents did an amazing job. And you can find me on Twitter at Joli A. Robin. Thank you all for the time here today. I really appreciate it. I'll look at the chat. I'll be mindful to look at the chat to see if there's any questions for me.